I love that there's like this giant water jug back there instead of bottled water. Like all of these little things that we can incorporate into our daily life are practices towards our collective freedom and how do we really want to show up in the world and what kind of life are we building for our children. So thank you. Passing it over.
So thanks so much for Halima. Our next speaker is going to be Karen Brown from the Detroit Food Co-op. She'll be joined later by Greg Hicks, also from the Detroit Food Co-op, but they also have about 8 other things that they do in their day job. So it also shows how a lot of this work gets done, not unlike what Halima is saying, that the people are working in many different capacities with many different hats. But I'll turn the mic over to you. Karen, thank you.
Hi, it's really exciting to see so many people out here. I wasn't sure what to expect when I agreed to do this, and who I was going to be speaking with and interacting with tonight, but really happy to be here. I'm a board member of the Detroit People's Food Co-op, which is a newly forming food co-op in Detroit. We passed out information to all of you and going to have a little inspiration from Malik Yakini, our board chair and founder, with the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network's executive director. Got a little video if I can get it to come up in a few. But anyhow, I've been involved with co-ops since the 1970s. I've lived in Detroit since I turned 18. I've lived in Detroit. Got involved with co-ops in the 70s, I think because I saw them as a vehicle for social change. And was an active member of the 3 for 3 food co-op and a couple of other local co-ops and buying clubs. And then in 1980, I became part of a collective that managed the Cass Corridor Food Co-op, and eventually we converted from collective management to a more traditional management structure, so I was the manager there for about 7 years. And then from there went on to do some work with worker-owned businesses, and then started doing work in the community development world. So I've been involved in a lot of Detroit grassroots efforts over the years, and I'm really excited that we've got a co-op in the works. And cooperatives are democratically owned businesses. They've been around for a long time, in different forms and in different cultures. A lot of the current food co-ops are based on, basically some, I would say, ethical and business principles that grew out of some worker activism in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, when people were moving from farms to cities, when they were increasingly working in the manufacturing world, and when their sources of food and sources of other goods were controlled by the companies that they worked for. A group of I think it was all men, but a group of brave guys in Rochdale, England, were textile workers who went on strike at their mill, and the strike failed, but what they decided to do was to find other ways to control their economy, to get the goods that they needed. So they saved their money and they formed a cooperative store as an alternative to shopping at the company store, and the company certainly wasn't happy about that, but it was successful. And in doing that, they came up with some principles, some business principles that a lot of co-ops today are based on. One is voluntary and open membership, that anybody can be a member. It doesn't matter what gender, social, race, political persuasion, religion, whatever. Anybody can be a member, and you can become a member at any time and leave the co-op at any time. And the second is democratic owner control. It's one member, one vote. No matter how much or how little money that you've invested as you become a member, that everybody has the same voice, and all voices are welcome at the table. And that anybody can be an owner. Owners contribute to capital to build the store, buy the store, manage, whatever. And then economic benefits are returned to the owners, returned by way of profit sharing or whatever, and then some is kept within the co-op to continue to grow the business. And co-ops were about one member, one vote before women had the right to vote, before African Americans and other cultures had the right to vote, and have been that way, I think, across the board. Co-ops are also autonomous self-help businesses that are controlled by their members. One of the values is education, training, and information. That co-ops provide education to their members, training to their members in what co-ops are about, training to their members in about the products that they sell, so that people are well educated and making good decisions about what they buy, how they buy it, and how the business is operated. I think another important principle is cooperation among cooperatives. It's not about competition, it's about co-ops working together. I remember once at Cass, when I was a member, going through the cash register and saw a little drawer, a little jar on the counter that said, "Save Gordon Park." And I asked somebody, what's Gordon Park? What's this? Who is this? What's Save Gordon Park about? Well, what had happened was the IRS had come after a co-op in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, because what they wanted to do was charge taxes on member labor, because that volunteer member labor was contributing to the profits of the business. And what they did was they sent a letter out to co-ops around the country. We didn't have email or texting or anything, but sent out a letter to co-ops around the country to get help. And a number of years later, I became friends with the person who had been the manager at Gordon Park back in the day, and she said that not very many co-ops responded, but the Cass Corridor Food Co-op responded and sent more money than any other co-op. And this was an inner city co-op in the city of Detroit. This wasn't, the Park Slope Cooperative or any of the other high-earning businesses that were based on a cooperative model. So I'm proud that we were able to step up and help out our fellow cooperative and help it survive. So the People's Food Co-op is what's called a concern for the community is another value. The People's Food Co-op is a consumer cooperative. It's about member ownership, not worker ownerships, although there are worker-owned models and also producer cooperatives that grow out of the farm industry. But most food co-ops are typically structured as consumer co-ops. They're owned by the people who shop there. They're governed by a board of directors who hires a manager, which is I'm on the board, Greg's on the board, so we have several members on the board, and we're growing a stronger board. The board is elected by the member owners. It's not a self-appointed group. And then sells products that the people in the store are interested in buying. It doesn't force a diet down people's throats. And what we hope to do at the People's Food Co-op is have a health food product line, but also sell some basic groceries that everybody needs and uses, or many people need and use. A hybrid model, not just the health food model of cooperatives, which is what Cass Corridor was. We had organic produce, but we also had basic broccoli and bean sprouts for the Chinese community to buy, who lived in the corridor at the time. Let's see what else I wanted to say. So basically, the Detroit People's Food Co-op is only going to be successful if we can get a lot of members on board. It costs $200 for a member share, and there are lots of ways that you can pay that, and that's a lifetime membership. And then it puts you in a position of being able to be involved in the governance of the organization, possibly, be involved possibly as a volunteer, and also have a share of the profits when the business is profitable, which might take a couple of years for us to do, but we intend to do it, and then return the profits to the members. Let me see what else I want to say in my last 2 minutes. Should we show Malik's thing now, or you talk first and then we'll show Malik's?
Why don't we just go on?
Okay. You'll go next, and we'll show his little clip. So we anticipate that the doors will open about a year from now. We do have a site identified in the Midtown News Center area, and The building is not going to be owned by the co-op. It will be owned by the Black Community Food Security Network, and the co-op will be the primary tenant in the building, along with other food-related and food justice organizations. And really excited to see this happening, because we've been without a co-op for a long time in Detroit, and I think really need one. And ask all of you to step up and help us make this vision a reality by joining and rolling up your sleeves and getting involved.
Good afternoon, everyone. A couple of things, and I kind of want to approach this the way Halima approached this. You know, kind of like something to kind of break the ice, if you will. How many people in the room can read? Raise your hand. Good. Glad we have that taken care of. 3 items I'd like for you to look at. We're not going to have enough time to go over a lot of these things this evening. I am mindful of the time, but I do want you, there was a brochure that we circulated. I would appreciate it if you would go online and go to the website that's listed on the brochure, and you can get a more systematic information that we're able to give you in this short period of time. Secondarily, want you, especially as a great number of you are students here, want you to invest in, and I say this time, purchasing a book called Collective Courage. This is an excellent book that was put together by Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nimhart, and it's a discussion about economic development, discussions primarily in the African American community, going back to slavery and moving forward. And she, in this book, really discusses the varying competing views and tactics that were used. A third item I would want to refer you to is for those who are like old-timers. Go back to a publication that was published in 1907 by Dr. Du Bois, Dr. William Du Bois. And in this one, it was essentially a discussion. He was part of a series of dialogues, much like this, which is occurring here in Atlanta University. And what he discussed back then was the question of cooperative economic development amongst the Negro. And so I don't want to spend a lot of time on weaving you through those things. At some point, since the vast majority of you said that you can read, I would hope that you would do that. I can't imagine out of the speakers you've had this evening that I have anything that I would necessarily disagree with. Therefore, I'm going to not go over any of the things, just assume I agree with it all, okay? I do want to, on the other hand, indicate that I'm a little concerned about the structure, the process, and questions of control. And I think that you ought to be concerned with structure, process, and control. Well, we might talk to you about individual projects in which we are involved with. At some point, what harmonizes those things, again, are questions of structure, process, and control. I would also want to give you 3 other quick words that I would utilize here. And part of this is kind of like a critique that I've had and that I think I share with everyone here who's spoken. I don't know where the rest of you are, right? But that when you look at what's occurring in the city of Detroit, and they have a lot of debate that's going on about downtown development, development in the Cass Corridor, so on and so forth. This whole fairly dynamic discussion. Well, at some point, questions of scope, size, and parity needs to also enter into that discussion. Scope, in its essence, is who's involved in this process of redevelopment. I would say, as a member of the African American community, is not many of us. Now, I would also say, and I was listening to the mayor's, I think, State of the State of the State address the other day, and the mayor highlighted a number of projects in which we're developing in the communities, if you will, and talked about some revolving loan funds and other things that were supporting those ventures. Fine. It brings me to the second question of size. I don't care if you were to grab all of those projects in which they discussed, put them in one bucket, that it would equal itself to almost any of the projects singularly that's going on in the downtown area. So size has to be a concern, you know, so who's involved, what's the size of it, and then you have to look at questions of parity. You know, everybody, I differ a little bit, everybody shouldn't be at the table. You know, some people have more rights at the table. Let me put it this way. Let me pull it back. Everybody should be at the table, but some people have more rights at the table, and put it that way, or more needs, if you think of it, at the table, okay? And so we have to be concerned about an affirmative approach toward building, if you will, our future. This is, I heard Dr. Hammer a couple of years ago talk about race and reconciliation, for example. And another way to put those things is to talk about what kind of affirmative moves need to take place in that regard. So in building this overall piece and conceptually, I don't see the simply just a question of having an individual co-op. I think that we need to lock arms and build seriously a cooperative economy. And that cooperative economy has room in it for any variety of practices that you've heard up here, and a variety of practices in which you may initiate in your own lives. And what should bind that together, however, yes, it's the question of the, if you outline, you take what Karen talked about in terms of the cooperative principles, yes, that's a good starting point, but also use our history. Cooperatives really are creations of necessity. That's really what they are. And when I say that, and I referred you earlier to Dr. Neimart's book, Collective Courage, she talks about during slavery, mutual aid societies, burial societies, and things like that that were developed out of necessity, where people essentially cooperated in order to meet the needs that Halima talked about on a more expansive basis. Halima. And so, in some sense, we have to really think about that. I made a pitch a few years ago to one of our community colleges, for example, to try and pull together what I consider to be, because they kind of create these new things in order to get you all the students to come there. But for a Center for Cooperative Development. And the Center for Cooperative Development, I gotta put my glasses on this one. No. The Center for Cooperative Development was essentially a forum that what you would do, you would have students like yourself who would be enrolled in let's say a 2-year curriculum, and that curriculum would largely focus on fair trade and fair price, okay? And I look at that as an economic discussion in its broader sense, fair trade and fair price. You'd also have projects that were classroom-based, where you would pull the classrooms together and you would break them down into areas, and the group of students would be forced as a graduation project is to actually create a cooperative that they would be so empowered to do that they would see themselves and they would make a commitment to their fellow students to stick with that project for at least another 2 years or 5 years and so forth, but actually have the basic outlines of that activity be born out of some collective study where you all make a commitment to each other. Because if you don't make the commitment, it's really not going to happen. And then the third thing on this, and part of this had to do with the specific conditions in which I think African Americans were faced with in the city of Detroit, and I would argue other cities, but in the city of Detroit, and that was to embrace historically black colleges around the country and see yourself in whatever the business creation under a cooperative, aligning it with some historically black college that is working essentially in that area. And I think that we need to take another look at really the diverse activity and the wide range of activity that's taking place in historically black colleges. Some people think that historically black colleges just, has the last, fraternal organization, that, those things are coming out of it. You see a wide variety. Medical, engineering, a whole bunch of things coming out of historically black college. In fact, even today, the vast majority of African Americans who receive graduate degrees get them from historically black colleges. They don't get them from historically white colleges, and universities. So it was a mix to try and take all of those things together, and that's the broader sense of a cooperative economy. It goes beyond just your immediate need, your immediate circumstances. It goes into creating alliances that understand structures and influence, and its ultimate goal is to really use levers of control to better the population in which you are concerned with, which is decidedly a little different, again, from just and I don't want to sound like I'm belittling anything, but it is decidedly a little different from a single operated food co-op that might have 30 individuals or 100 individuals in that. If we can't get to these larger dimensions in our society and think about them and have the ability to break them down in such a way that they're manageable for people to enjoy, but even if you break them down, don't be so narrow in one's view that you can't see the broader set of activities that need to go on. Because what we're after is changing the society. We're not after getting a new pair of gym shoes, We're after changing the society, okay? And I would simply say, I got the sign that says wrap it up. I would simply say, in wrapping it up, pay attention to the handout in which we provided. If you're interested in joining the food cooperative, we really appreciate it. We need the engagement of all of you in such a project. And thank you.
Bring this all the way back. Marion, could you cue up the video? We don't like to tease and not deliver. If you promise that Malika Keeney is going to speak in a room about the food co-op, then Malika Keeney is going to speak in the room about the food co-op. So, great. No, but really listen to one of the voices of our elders here that really provides the motivation for this, in the small sense, but in the broad sense that Greg and Karen were talking about.
This co-op is so important because right now there are no black-owned grocery stores in the city of Detroit. Detroit is a city of approximately 700,000 people, and the African-American community is totally dependent upon others for our food. And so that's a huge problem. In addition to the problem of us having an extractive economy where money is taken out of our community, we also oftentimes have food which is of an inferior quality when compared to the food that's available in the suburbs surrounding Detroit. And this inferior food is having a tremendously negative health impact on Detroit's African American community. And so all of our projects are designed to both provide greater access to healthy food, but also to educate our community members about the importance of eating healthy food. One of the things that we found is that we now have generations of people who have grown up in this fast food culture. And so it's not just a matter of providing greater access to healthy food. Many of us no longer know how to prepare whole foods from scratch because we're so used to preparing foods from boxes and styrofoam containers or going to fast food restaurants. So it's critical for our health and survival that we begin to exhibit more control of the food system that impacts our lives, because there's not many examples around the country of food co-ops that are serving the demographic they will be serving. There's food co-ops throughout the country, but many of those are in either more affluent communities or they're in college towns. And so this is a very unique model because it's serving a primarily African American urban community, in fact, a neighborhood which is primarily low and moderate income. And so we're really going against the grain and showing that models can be created that serve underserved and intentionally disinvested communities and serve to empower those communities. We're not only interested in having greater access to food, but we're interested in empowering the community that we're a part of. So we want to encourage people to join and become member owners of the Detroit People's Food Co-op. And we use that term member owners because the owner part is very important. It's not like just joining Sam's Club where you get a membership card and you get to shop there and you get a discount. But by becoming a member owner of the Detroit People's Food Co-op, you actually help to shape the development of the project. You help to make sure that the integrity of the project is in place, that the values are sustained, and that it continues to be an institution that serves our community. We want to encourage people to become member owners of the Detroit People's Food Co-op.
I'd say one more round of applause for our wonderful panel and the insights they're sharing. We're going to open up for questions, so people just kind of raise their hands if you have comments or not. But I want to say this one thing, and then we'll start with the gentleman over there. In life, you're looking for things that are both microcosms and macrocosms, right? Things that reflect the values at a very small level, but things that have a transformative potential to be taking on something and transforming whole societies. And I think a theme that is going through each one of these conversations and that Malika Keeney is talking about has that potential, right? So think about these and what they mean in the small sense, but never lose sight of the fact that these are things that are part of a much broader macrocosm that have really truly transformational potential. So you speak loudly because the court does not go that far, but the gentleman against the wall.
Thank you to the panel for sharing. So this is a question to all of you. As a young innovator who wishes to take a human-centered approach to designing solutions for the people of Detroit, how might I go about unearthing the needs of the people of the city? So what are some questions I can ask? What are some observations I can make? What are some methods that I can use so that I can tap into this shared economy potential while being able to design solutions that meet the needs of the people as opposed to starting from the top down?
Who wants to grab that?
I'll try.
I would say start by not reinventing the wheel. There are several organizations in Detroit who work in community who are run by the community. They know the answers to those questions. They know because they've been asking those questions and getting the answers for decades. And so I would do the homework to figure out who they are, who the community-led, Black-led groups are run by longtime Detroiters, and get in touch with them, with an open learning framework that you are interested in learning from them and being a part of their work in a supportive role, and that you are trying to seek information just by observing and by assisting. And I think that's the best way to learn, is to go in with a framework of working with community and not in an extractive manner, not going in to extract information to go take it somewhere else and use it, but to insert yourself, embed yourself in the community, and you will learn through experience and through the relationships you build in community with people who are already there.
No, actually, she hit it.
All right, and if people signal to me, and I'll try to keep a stack, but this gentleman over here.
Okay, thank you. It's a comment. I always do comments, so and I'm consuming that daily. I have two comments. One is a macro level one, and so is micro level. So let me start from the small scale. So basically, I want to report something I call real existing shared economy in China. So basically, in my hometown, there is a public bicycle system where I live in Shanghai. There are more than 40 million people live here, and half of them, including myself, don't have a driver's license because we don't need it, rather than we can offer it. Because you can drive that shared bicycle to everywhere. And this kind of system creates three benefits to the community. One is it creates economic justice for the lower class and also the middle class, because you don't have to offer the gasoline, you don't have to pay tax, and you don't have to pay for the cars. Number two is it creates public safety benefits, because you don't have that kind of concern about spending on your transportation fees. The lower class people tend to be a little